I remember the moment with absolute clarity. It did not unfold during a tense executive meeting or a crisis call. It happened during a birthday celebration, in a room filled with decorations, polite laughter, and the kind of family pride that often hides quiet injustice. The company had been sinking for months. Clients were drifting away, systems were collapsing, and every department was preparing excuses for the inevitable collapse. The only reason the lights were still on was the software I had crafted alone, line by line, long after everyone else had gone home. That evening, my stepfather raised a glass and congratulated his daughter for her supposed vision. He presented the software as her new achievement, a symbol of the future leadership he claimed she was ready for. The applause was immediate. Guests congratulated her with genuine admiration, unaware that she had never touched a single technical document. I stood in the back, unnoticed, watching my work become someone else's legacy. When the noise softened, he approached me with a gentle smile. No audience now. No witnesses. He placed $500 in my hand and told me it reflected my contribution. The softness of his tone made the words sting even more. I felt something settle inside me. It was not anger. It was recognition. I understood that this moment was not about performance or sacrifice. It was about who they believed deserved credit and who existed only to support their narrative. I offered no reaction. I returned home in silence, opened my laptop, and began preparing for a future in which I would no longer wait for anyone to recognize my value. Silence can look passive to the inexperienced. It can look like surrender or hesitation. With time, you learn it can also be a position of strength. After the birthday incident, everyone expected a reaction from me. Some waited for an argument, others anticipated a resignation. Instead, I arrived at work the next morning and followed my usual routine. I spoke little, answered only what needed to be answered, and allowed the room to reveal itself. Meetings continued as if nothing unusual had happened. My stepfather encouraged his daughter to take ownership of the software roadmap. She repeated suggestions she barely understood, yet no one corrected her. The team nodded politely while avoiding the technical depth that would expose how little they grasped. I sat quietly, taking mental notes, watching which managers align themselves with her new role and which ones preferred to stay neutral. Over the next few days, I noticed how the conversations changed. People discussed new interface ideas and presentation themes as if appearance alone could carry a product. They praised future updates without understanding the foundation required to support them. No one mentioned the internal structure. No one asked who maintained the core logic. No one even questioned how the system would manage increased traffic from the upcoming contract the company hoped to secure. Their confidence made something clear. They believed the hard part was over. They believed the creation was complete and all that remained was promotion. I realized they had no curiosity about the risks hidden beneath the surface. Their lack of understanding gave me the distance I needed. I continued to remain silent, not because I felt defeated, but because silence allowed every truth to rise without interference. In the weeks that followed, I watched them interact with the software as if it were an object that could be held, displayed, and claimed. They treated it like a trophy, a polished symbol of progress that required only enthusiasm to keep functioning. My stepfather walked through the office demonstrating the dashboard to visitors with the pride of someone showing off a new car. His daughter rehearsed explanations for potential clients and memorized phrases she believed sounded technical. The team congratulated them both, convinced the company finally possessed something stable and market-ready. What they did not see was the quiet machinery beneath the surface. The system relied on relationships built over years, not minutes. Data moved through channels that reacted to pressure, failure, and demand. Every feature required a specific set of permissions to avoid security gaps. Failover logic had been designed to redirect entire operations within seconds if a server collapsed. Nothing about it was static. Every part depended on another. The visible layer was only the smallest element. Their belief in ownership rested entirely on access. They had a login. They had a name to attach to presentations. They had confidence that the product belonged to them simply because it appeared complete. I understood that the true ownership lived elsewhere. It lived in the knowledge of what would break under stress. It lived in the understanding of how each component communicated with the next. It lived in the awareness that a single overlooked detail could bring the entire company to a halt. I continued to observe without interrupting. Their certainty revealed the limits of their vision. Structure has a way of correcting assumptions, and I knew that moment was approaching. That evening I sat at my desk long after the house had gone quiet. The glow of the screen felt steadier than my thoughts. I began writing the kind of messages people send when they feel betrayed. One version demanded recognition. Another described the months of work no one had acknowledged. A third exposed every inconsistency in the story they had told at the birthday celebration. Each message sharpened my frustration instead of clarifying my next step. I realized none of them would serve me. They would only confirm the narrative that I was reactive rather than rational. So I opened a blank page and approached the situation the way an engineer approaches a failing system. I noted timelines, milestones, and performance shifts. I documented the technical dependencies the company was relying on without understanding. I described upcoming risks connected to the expansion they were publicly promoting. There was no mention of ownership conflicts or personal grievances. There was only data, written with the restraint of someone who had nothing to prove and no desire to negotiate. I read the message several times until it felt balanced. Then I confirmed who truly needed to receive it. Not my stepfather. Not his daughter. Not the managers who had applauded without knowing what they were supporting. I sent it to the top investor, the person whose money and reputation were directly tied to the success of the software. He was the one who would understand the weight of what I had outlined. The moment I pressed send, a calm settled over me. I had spoken without emotion, yet my message carried authority. I knew the situation would shift, not because of noise, but because truth in the right hands becomes movement. The investor responded sooner than I expected. His first message was brief, a simple request for clarification. I replied with the same precision I used in the report. Within hours, he scheduled a private call. He wanted to understand the system beneath the product, the part no one had bothered to explain during the celebration. I described the real structure, the points of failure, the timelines required for safe expansion, and the consequences of mismanagement. He did not comment. He only asked for supporting documents. 2 days later, the company announced a series of internal reviews. They called them routine, but everyone in the building sensed something different. Meetings multiplied. People entered rooms with confidence and left with uncertainty. The questions were no longer decorative. They were targeted. They focused on performance, security, sustainability, and continuity. My stepfather tried to answer with his usual authority, but each explanation led to another request he was not prepared for. Auditors arrived next. They examined logs and traced decisions back to their origins. They compared public announcements with internal capabilities. The more they investigated, the more obvious the gap became between what had been promised and what was structurally possible. Conversations behind closed doors stretched longer each afternoon. Departing executives avoided eye contact. Even the daughter who had been celebrated remained quiet whenever the product was mentioned. I received my first call late in the evening. It was the investor. He asked if I was available for a discussion about stability. The tone was respectful, almost cautious. I realized the balance had shifted. The company no longer needed reassurance from leadership. It needed understanding. And understanding lived with me. The invitation arrived in a short message from my stepfather. He asked if I could join the family for a discussion. The wording was formal, almost careful, nothing like the confident tone he had used during the birthday speech. I accepted without comment. When I entered the dining room, the setting was the same as always. The same chairs, the same centerpiece, the same arrangement of plates. Yet the atmosphere carried a weight that everyone felt, but no one wanted to name. They began with small talk that dissolved quickly. My stepfather folded his hands and said there had been misunderstandings about roles and expectations. He avoided specifics, choosing phrases that sounded polished rather than sincere. His daughter nodded at intervals, her eyes lowered toward the table. She did not speak. My stepmother tried to soften the conversation with reassurances about the importance of unity and future collaboration. No one mentioned the software directly. They danced around it with references to upcoming projects and shared vision. They spoke about alignment, support, and stability. Words chosen carefully, not to repair anything, but to reposition themselves. They were not apologizing. They were recalibrating. I listened without interruption. Their tone had changed because the company's circumstances had changed. They needed clarity and continuity. They needed someone who understood what was now under review. They needed the very thing they had dismissed weeks earlier. At our age, recognition arrives quietly. It does not take the shape of sorry or admission. It appears in the way people adjust their posture, in the way they choose their words, in the way they return to the person they underestimated. I left the table knowing the balance had shifted in my favor. The shift began so quietly that no one could point to a single moment. It unfolded through a sequence of ordinary decisions that carried extraordinary consequences. The investor requested weekly updates on the system rather than monthly summaries. He asked for them directly from me. My stepfather agreed without objection. The daughter who had once presented the software as her achievement was reassigned to a different project. They called it a strategic move. Everyone understood it was a correction. Department leaders started reaching out with questions they had never asked before. They no longer assumed the product would function on its own. They wanted guidance on releases, compatibility, and growth projections. Meetings that had previously excluded me now required my presence. Not as a courtesy, but as necessity. There was no announcement. There did not need to be one. Influence moves quietly when competence becomes visible. In the background, legal and financial teams began updating documentation. Ownership paths were clarified. Responsibility charts were redrawn. A revised equity structure appeared in my inbox with a short note from the investor stating that alignment required accuracy. I read it twice, understanding what it implied. The celebration that had once erased my work had now become a reference point for what not to repeat. The company seemed calmer. Decisions flowed more logically. Risks were addressed before problems appeared. Each improvement traced back to the same source, although no one said it out loud. One morning, while reviewing system analytics, I realized I no longer felt sidelined or overlooked. I was directing the momentum. The seat I had once fought to keep was no longer relevant. I had moved past it. I was guiding the entire engine. If you are over 50, there is something you have learned through years of work that younger professionals cannot yet understand. Your value is often quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It becomes visible only when pressure rises and stability is required. People close to you may overlook it because they assume it will always be available. They confuse familiarity with ownership. They see the results, but not the judgment behind them. The truth is that your worth is recognized most clearly by those who understand risk. Investors, decision makers, and people who carry responsibility know that experience cannot be replaced by enthusiasm. They know that skill developed over decades cannot be transferred with a title or a ceremony. They know that calm analysis in moments of uncertainty is more valuable than any presentation. You do not need to argue when someone underestimates you. You do not need to correct anyone who misrepresents your contribution. You do not need to display anger to prove your importance. Those reactions drain energy and rarely change outcomes. What matters is the record you keep, the clarity of your position, and the preparation you maintain. Structure reveals truth. It exposes who does the real work when the system is under strain. It shows whose decisions hold the company steady when conditions change. It highlights the difference between people who speak confidently and people who carry the weight of continuity.